Well, hey everyone. I just want to go through a few things, kind of some final checks on technology side, and then ultimately just kind of some thoughts about getting out in the field post planting, evaluating the quality of planting, but also kind of looking at what your yield potential is as you leave the field from that scouting time. We're already at a point here in Ohio where planters have already been through in the field, and in some cases we got some corn and even beans up in a few places. So most everyone's been through their planter. Everything should be in good operating conditions, but it doesn't hurt here in a second just to kind of go back and, especially on a rainy day, kind of check out some of the technology, make sure things are backed up and also up to date on versions and such. And I'll go through that here in a minute. But with that, I just want to kind of remind everyone, these are conditions that we get to play in here in Ohio. This is just a remote sense image, bare soil image here from Central Ohio. And in the conditions we put planters in today, in particular, as we think that springs are more wet, are highly variable. Organic matter, in particular texture, varies across the field. And so when we talk about technology and what it can do in terms of either feedback or maintaining planter performance, planting depth, as I think about it a lot of times, that's the real value, because the conditions as we move from one side of the field can be highly variable. And so we want to maintain performance from day one till the end of the season. And that's where I think technology, not only having a high quality display, but having things like downforce and that feedback to tell us what's going on as we move across that field, and if we need to make adjustments, because again, our conditions can be highly variable here in Ohio. Two important things: we want to achieve optimal stands, and you hear a lot of talks about uniform emergence. And our goal when we put the planter in and ultimately when we leave the field is, did we place that seed accurately? Important to that is, did we do it at a consistent depth? And did we hit our target seeding rate? Okay, and depth definitely plays a role in emergence, and as we've gone out and over a 3-year study found that it can vary quite a bit across the field, even for a planter. We need soil temperature to be over 50 degrees. Soil moisture is very important, though sometimes we just have to go, but we can be too wet and we get compaction, which ultimately could lead to uneven emergence or disease. And as I noted in the prior slide, texture can highly vary in our fields. And again, when we think about things like downforce or DF there, that's really where the value can come in to maintain the proper downforce as conditions change, texture and moisture, and maintaining our proper seeding depth. So, but ultimately we want to maximize yield potential when we place that seed, and we don't want to have the planter be one of the causes of reducing that yield potential. Things that influence corn emergence, planting density, of course. Very important to our discussion today is we want to have good seed to soil contact. That's one of the very important ingredients to a successful planting operation. Seeding depth, is important, as mentioned. Ultimately, soil moisture, soil temperature. Seed size plays an influence. Just to note, a larger seed is going to take more moisture to get it to emerge than a small seed. Okay, seed orientation, and then ultimately genetics. In that list, when we go up to the first three, those are things that we can control on the planter: seed to soil contact and seeding depth. So we want to pay attention to those. And I would note that I would evaluate both the furrow and seeding depths, both at the time of planting, make sure that planter's set up properly, but post-planting, do some investigative work to make sure that that was, the seed to soil contact was good. A lot of times you can walk fields and you'll note that the slits are still, or the furrow is still open and didn't get closed properly. So we know we probably didn't have good seed to soil contact in that area. So just a quick ideas around checking on technology. Actually, Monday I spent some time updating 4 displays, brand new displays that needed some updates. So it just is a good reminder to me that always check what version you're at, and either work with your technology dealer or your local equipment dealer, whoever you're working with, and see what the latest versions are and if there's any updates required. And this is primarily the interface that you're going to be working on in the cab to check those. You go into the menus and check what we'll talk about here on the next slide is both the GPS or GNS receiver version and ultimately this display version, and making sure that's all up to date. Kind of a rule of thumb in my book is about every company puts out at least 1 update per year. Some cases it could be 2, so just kind of be aware of that. And since we're in a seed season, make sure that you're up to date. There's always changes and updates that are very critical to the field operation, in particular planning that they may be doing. Here's kind of just a 6-point checklist that I kind of throw out. As mentioned, make sure your firmware and your GPS receiver is up to date, and that includes the firmware in your in-cab display. Okay, those are fairly easy to check. If you don't know how to do that, either get the operator's manual or check with your dealer. In some cases, folks will come out and do that for you. Make sure your GPS offsets and planner offsets are correct. This is in particular, I get in cases where we trade up tractors. So we got a new display, or we weren't able to bring that old display, but we need to make changes to that. That's going to be very important for your row shutoffs for that. And then also if you're doing variable rate seating, making sure seating rate changes are happening at the proper location. While we're doing some of the growers I work with, of course we get off the planner and check for that by digging seeds to look at where we're at on our row shutoffs and if we need to make adjustments to that as we go through planning. But usually once we have those set, it's pretty good for the remainder of the planning season. Encourage you to back up and archive past year's planning data and place that in a secure location, either in the farm office or in the house, but have that on a laptop, external hard drive, put in a cloud like Box or Dropbox or something similar. But make sure you got a backup of, your 2019 planning and yield data in particular already, and know where that is. If you're purchasing a differential correction, make sure your subscription is up to date before the planning season. For example, on the new tractor I was working with on Monday, I think they had a 10-day free or something left on theirs. So they already had to make data in theirs. So just something to check if you're buying a correction service, that it's up to date on your payment, so you can at least get through planning, if not the remainder of the year. And then finally, and this is obvious, probably most people's already done this, but just kind of look over all your wiring harnesses and connectors for damage and loose connections. We know that rodents love to hang out on some of this equipment, in particular the electronics, over the winter months. So make sure they haven't nested and chewed on anything. Another thing that I highly recommend is going back to kind of that number 2 point is I would have a written down or put in a kind of a note in your smartphone or iPad what those setups, or at least take pictures of your final setups from the display. I know sometimes you get a hard reset on a display and you lose all your setups, and if you don't have all that written down, it can be a pain in the butt to go back through and figure out those. Some you save those, and so either if you're trading or if you do a hard reset and those setup are lost, that you at least have something you can refer to get it back set up. So that's my quick technology checklist. Kind of moving on, I think really important today, even though we haven't got everything planted, is begin to think about what your scouting routine and evaluation of your planner and the final stands are today. I think you need scouting our field and visiting locations where that are different. The bottom picture there is just an organic map off of a smart firmer, or created from Precision Planting Smart Firmer, and we know differences. And so we're going to, for us, at least the way we do research when we're doing some of these even strip trials, we're going to go out in these different areas, and I'm going to personally drop pins in those areas. Typically, we're using Climate Field View Cab to do that, and then have students and myself go out and we scout, and that's where we're going to take our population or stand counts and things like that. So I think you just need to be thinking about doing that on a field by field. These apps make it very convenient to go out and navigate to those locations and then collect the data of interest. What are some key variables? I'm going to come back to depth again. We spend a little bit of time in particular, especially if we're seeing some emergence issues of digging up seed or emerged seedlings and measuring depth. We try and be consistent in that, but we want to understand, were we consistent across the field? So when we went to all these pins, we were digging some plants up and looking at that and measuring that. But we hope we're consistent. But sometimes you'll find that maybe as you move across the field, it may have changed just naturally because of the field conditions. Another thing that we spend a lot of time on is collecting emergence quality. Really that, and I'm going to talk more about this on the next slide, but we're going to count and get our population. We also evaluate uniformity. So if we're counting, 17.5 foot, or if we take a 20 foot, depending on some of the things that we do, we go down and look at every single plant and note what growth stage it is at. And so we can understand if hopefully if we're out there around a V3, V4, they're all at that point. But sometimes you'll find that, hey, we got a few at V5, and shoot, we got a few, all the way down to V2. So understand that stand uniformity is very important. And then another thing we'll scout for is compaction issues, pinch rows, or if we see an open furrow, understanding did we have compaction there when that planter. So let's dive into that a little bit more. Here's kind of our routine. Again, I'm not advocating that this is the only way. There's all other ones out there, but again, we typically are using Field View Cab. We throw our pins out, and you note that I'll change the colors on those just because of maybe some different treatments that we've got out there. But we're going to go and collect data. Like I mentioned, we do our stand counts. We compare that back to what we expected our target seeding rate to be. The other thing, as I mentioned, we do a quality of the seedling emergence, again, stand uniformity. And so when we're out there, we're looking at every plant, adjacent plant, over roughly a 17.5 foot length, and we're noting, hey, this one's a 2, this one's a V4, V3, and we're able to summarize that and characterize the uniformity of emergence essentially. The other thing that happens, and I just kind of highlight here today, is looking for discolorization, and do we have any deficiencies? You see in the top plant, I just remind everyone, sometimes we can take a quick glance and say, oop, we got some nutrient deficiency there. But look upon a little closer, it could be sulfur. And just a picture of a corn plant with sulfur deficiency, note starting out on the outside, you can see kind of the streaks here, but outside in. Whereas on your nitrogen here, you're going to start with that yellowing at the center rib and work its way out. So make sure you pay attention and note what deficiencies, if there is any. Right here in this picture I've got drawn out of our field view, we basically had potassium deficiency. And so the students were able to take pictures of that, and that was all caused due to pinch row in that field. And so everywhere we had pinch row in some of those places of field, you just walk down that row and see potassium deficiency. So just some ideas to be able to take good notes. And again, this one was a planter induced deficiency, whereas these may or may not be, depending on what the conditions were. So some thoughts on that. We like to take those notes. We like to keep those electronic so we can share them internally, but hey, a notepad just works as well, or a smartphone taking pictures and taking notes works just well. And a lot of times I find myself using my smartphone to do that, to document some of these, and GPS locate them as well, so I can share them back with the farmer that we're working with if necessary. ultimately, from all that scouting where we go through all those points, I think you need to be able to leave a field and understand where your yield potential. We see basically six rows there on the left that basically we had a starter fertilizer issue. But we saw this consistently over the field. I do a simple rating of the fields. I just use green, yellow, and red. You know, the traffic light. You know, are we maintaining yield potential, or maybe even have a good year up to this point? And I mark that green. You can see one of our seeding rate trials on the right here. When we went out and scouted this field, it was in perfect condition, had really good uniform emergence, populations were good, and so it got a green light in my book, and that we're there at that point in the season and trotting along. So I expect when we get to V5, V6, and we're thinking about setting, you know, the number of rows in that corn on that ear, hey, we're going to expect maximum. You know, I hope we're getting 18 to 20. Over here, we got these issues, and so I marked this as a field where we had some questionable. I'm not sure we're going to maintain or because of this issue that we had. Unfortunately, we didn't catch that at the time of planting. It was post-planting, but possibly. But something just to kind of note that at least when I left the field, I know where we're standing. That could turn green in the future, but right now it's not looking as good as it could have been, and so that's why it gets a yellow in my book. So I try and keep it simple. I don't necessarily try and quantify it, but just a green, yellow, and red. Red means definitely we've lost yield. Yellow, we'll see how things progress over the next month. But something I think is very important to be able to leave the field and know where you're at, and you know, where am I standing at as relative to what I expect to get out of that field. If you want to learn more, of course, our e-fields, Tony and Elizabeth are on here, and Kent, well, the rest of you as well. But I just want to note that there's several planter type projects that are reported in that on various pages. There's more than I show here, but I encourage you to look through the 17, 18, and 19 versions if you want to learn a little bit more and have time to read about planning and the impact of some of these different technologies and practices as it relates to ultimately the yield.